Ever feel like your brain has a mind of its own? Like something else is running the show behind the scenes?
Well, get ready to dive into AlgoCon.
AlgoCon.
Yeah, it's this theory suggesting our consciousness, the whole shebang of our thoughts and feelings, actually operates a lot like an algorithm.
Okay, like lines of code, but for our brains.
Exactly. Like those algorithms deciding what pops up on your social media feed, but instead, this one's shaping your decisions, your reactions, even your perception of the world. We're unpacking some seriously interesting notes on this today, so...
I am so ready for this.
What's really wild is this theory starts with something we all have, something fundamental to who we are. DNA.
Okay, DNA, the blueprint of life and all that.
Yeah.
But how does that connect to our consciousness being, an algorithm?
Think of DNA as the architect of your brain, specifically your nervous system, that intricate web of billions of neurons.
Right, neurons, the messengers of the brain.
And each neuron, each one of those billions, can hold a mind-boggling amount of information.
Billions of neurons. We're talking serious processing power up there.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking 86 billion neurons. And get this, each one with a potential storage capacity equivalent to 10 to the power of 24 books.
Whoa, 10 to the 24th power. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Imagine the entire Library of Congress.
Okay, got it. Massive amount of information.
Now picture that crammed into a single brain cell.
No way. Each neuron can hold that much.
That's the thing. Our brains are incredible. And it's this crazy complex structure built by our DNA that forms the basis for everything we experience. That delicious taste of your morning coffee.
Don't forget my morning coffee.
The joy of listening to your favorite music.
Yep.
All thanks to those 86 billion little wonders.
Okay, now that's a comparison I can get behind. So our brains are like supercomputers built by our DNA. But how do we go from electrical signals, neurons firing, to actually feeling something? Like, how do I look up at a starry sky and feel, awe?
That's where combinatorial coding comes in. Imagine our sense of smell. We don't have a specific receptor for every single scent out there, right?
There'll be a lot of receptors.
Instead, it's the combinations, the unique patterns of different odor receptors firing that create the perception of countless smells, like a neural symphony, if you will.
Okay, so instead of one neuron for coffee and another for, say, roses, it's the unique combination of neurons firing that creates those distinct smells in our minds.
You got it. Now apply that same concept to all our experiences. AlgoCon suggests those experiences, the feeling of redness, the sensation of love, what we call qualia. Those are generated by specific patterns of neural activity, all beautifully orchestrated by this algorithm.
Qualia, it's like what it feels like part of an experience. So the feeling of biting into a crisp apple or the warmth of the sun on your skin, those are qualia.
Absolutely. And AlgoCon proposes those feelings arise from this algorithm activating specific pathways in our neurons. It's like this. The algorithm sends a pulse through this massive network, and boom, you recognize a loved one's face or feel that surge of excitement.
That's my AlgoCon at work.
Precisely.
This whole algorithm thing, it really makes you think about how we make decisions. I mean, if it's this algorithm calling the shots, does that mean free will is?
Ah, the age-old question.
Out the window.
We'll definitely circle back to free will, but first, let's zoom in on a part of the brain that's a major player in our decision-making.
The limbic system.
Okay, the limbic system, remind me, what was that again?
Think of it as your emotional core.
Oh, right. The part of our brains that loves to hit that fight or flight button.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Picture your limbic system as this always-on autopilot, constantly working behind the scenes to process emotions and steer your actions, and often you're not even aware it's happening.
Okay, so maybe not always a dramatic fight or flight situation, but it is shaping how I react to everyday stuff.
Exactly.
But let's say I just got cut off in traffic. That anger I feel, that's my limbic system doing its thing.
Bingo. And here's where it gets interesting. The limbic system doesn't treat all emotions equally. It's got this thing called ruling control, meaning it prioritizes some emotions over others.
It's like our brain has a ranking system for my emotions, deciding which ones get top billing in different situations.
You got it. Those VIP emotions then drive our actions in those moments. Have you ever, blurted something out in the heat of the moment and instantly regretted it?
Oh, all the time. Who hasn't?
Classic limbic system, driven by those heightened emotions. Powerful system, but sometimes those responses aren't the most helpful in our modern world.
I hear that. But if our brains are like collections of billions of individual neurons, how do they work together so smoothly? It's not like there's a tiny conductor in there directing this whole symphony of thoughts, right?
You're right, no little conductor.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, think of it more like, like a flock of birds.
Okay.
They all move in sync.
Yeah.
Changing direction is one. Right, like a wave flowing through them. But there's no one bird in charge.
Exactly. That's kind of what's happening in our brains with this swarm intelligence. 86 billion neurons, all acting independently, but somehow creating this unified experience we call consciousness. And it all happens so fast.
It really is amazing when you think about it. Okay, so we've got this swarm of neurons working together, but what about our emotions? They can really mess things up sometimes, right?
You're hitting on a key point. AlgoCon actually suggests our emotions, as crucial as they are to being human, might be a little outdated, like old software running on a brand new computer.
Outdated? How so?
Well, think about it. Our brains, our emotions, they evolved in a very different time. Think back to our ancestors trying to survive on the savannah, constantly facing danger.
Right. Always on the lookout for predators.
Their survival depended on reacting instantly to those threats. Fight or flight mode.
So you're saying our brains today are still wired for a world of saber-toothed tigers, even though the biggest threat I face now is like an inbox full of emails?
You got it. Those ancient ingrained responses, they're still there, ready to protect us. But the thing is, those responses are often triggered by things that aren't actually life or death situations.
So that near panic attack I get when I miss a deadline.
Yeah.
Or that wave of frustration when I hit every red light on the way to work. You're telling me my brain thinks I'm facing a real physical threat in those moments.
In a way, yes. Your brain, still operating on that old software, misinterprets those everyday stressors as potential dangers. Hence, the surge of adrenaline, the racing heart, even when, logically, you're not in any real danger.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense, but it's also kind of unsettling. So if our emotional reactions are, like, hardwired to be a little over the top for our modern lives, what can we do about it? Can we reprogram them?
The good news is we can definitely gain more control. AlgoCon really emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and practices like meditation. It's about hitting the pause button on those automatic emotional programs,
Okay, I like that, hitting the pause button. How does that work?
By calming your mind, becoming more aware of those emotional patterns, you can start to catch those outdated responses before they take over.
So instead of letting my emotions drive, I can learn to, step back, see them for what they are, and choose a different way to respond.
Exactly. Creating that space between feeling and reacting, that's key. And that's where things like mindfulness and meditation can be really helpful. They help you tap into that adult part of your personality, the one capable of logic and reason.
Right, the adult personality. We were talking about those different personalities in our brains earlier. That is super fascinating. But it also sounds a little out there. Are we talking about multiple personalities like the kind you see in movies?
Not exactly. It's not about having completely separate personalities. Instead, think of them like different aspects of your personality.
Okay.
Each one rooted in a different stage of our evolutionary journey, and they all operate with different levels of awareness. Remember how the notes talked about child, parent, and adult personalities?
Right. So it's like all these parts of me are always there, influencing my thoughts, but I'm not always aware of which one is in the driver's seat.
You've got it. Sometimes it's that impulsive child personality wanting instant gratification. Other times it might be the parent personality, driven by responsibility, maybe a need for control.
And ideally, we want that adult personality running the show most of the time.
Exactly. The adult has access to our higher reasoning, helps us make more thoughtful, values-driven choices.
Okay, so how do we make sure that adult personality stays in charge? Especially when those other parts can be so persuasive. It's like having this internal committee, and they're all trying to get my attention and steer the ship.
Yeah.
So how do we make sure that wiser, more conscious part of ourselves wins out?
It's really about awareness and practice. The amazing thing about our brains is how adaptable they are. So every time you actually stop and think about your emotions, every time you choose a more mindful response instead of just reacting, you're actually strengthening those neural pathways connected to that adult personality.
So it's like building up a mental muscle. The more I work on observing my thoughts, choosing my responses, the stronger that part of me becomes.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that big question we touched on earlier, free will.
Right. If our brains are essentially running on these algorithms, these patterns, where does free will come in? Do we actually have a say in our own decisions, or are we kind of just along for the ride?
Yeah, it's a question people have been wrestling with forever.
So what's AlgoCon's take on it?
Well, it doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but it does acknowledge that our ingrained patterns, those neural pathways we've built up over time, they have a huge impact on the choices we make.
It's like our brain is always giving us a pre-selected menu of options based on what it's learned from our past experiences.
Right.
And what it thinks is safe or appropriate for us.
That's a great way to put it. The notes actually called those pre-selected options WASPA. Yeah, it stands for worthwhile, appropriate, safe, or practical. Our internal filter, if you will. It's always running in the background, steering us away from anything it sees as too risky or unconventional.
Wow. Waste punk. It's like our brain has its own little rating system going on in there. But if our choices are already being filtered like that, does that mean we're just like destined to repeat the same patterns, make the same mistakes over and over again?
Not necessarily. AlgoCon might say that total, limitless free will might be a bit of an illusion, but it also offers a different way of looking at things. Remember the part about the philosopher Rudolf Steiner?
Vaguely.
He talked about how real freedom isn't about having this infinite number of choices, but about making choices that align with our values, with our deepest selves.
So it's not about having unlimited choices, but about making choices that feel right, that feel true to who we are.
Exactly, and that's where tapping into the wisdom of that adult personality is so important. When we're in touch with our values, when we're aware of the patterns influencing us, we have a kind of freedom, even within the structure of our own programming.
So even if our choices are being shaped by all these complex things, we still have the power to move our lives in a direction that feels meaningful, fulfilling.
You got it. And that's really empowering, isn't it? It's not about being at the mercy of our biology. It's about understanding how our minds work so we can reach our full potential.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Before we wrap up, I'm curious, what's the big ultimate goal of AlgoCon?
Well, they talk about wanting to demystify consciousness, just like, how figuring out DNA totally revolutionized biology. AlgoCon is trying to do the same for the mind, unlock human potential by really understanding how it all works.
So imagine a world where we have therapies and technologies that actually help us enhance our well-being, boost our creativity, all based on this deeper understanding of the brain as an algorithm.
Exactly, that's the dream.
I like the sound of that future. Well, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today. Definitely a lot to think about. If our brains are basically running this incredibly intricate algorithm, what does that mean for how much we can actually change? How do we rewrite our own internal code? We'll leave you with that thought-provoking question. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the amazing world of the human mind.